There is no doubt that we live in interesting times, whether that's the interest for all the wrong reasons in terms of all of the upset in the market today with the likes of admins and CVAs, or perhaps more interesting, longer-term things going on, whether that's looking at the rise of artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, drones, and the like. There are a huge number of technological and societal changes that are going to impact many industries, and both retail and retail real estate will be no different to those. Calling exactly which of these technologies and changes will have the most impact and when, however, is a really tough game. What is clear, and is not new news, is that online sales are growing, and they have done actually pretty consistently, about 1% a year for many years now. Of course, history is the easy bit. Trying to look at what might happen next is rather harder. And there's a whole range of different views out there. We spoke to many CEOs in different retail businesses, logistic businesses, and so on. And you get quite a range of opinions, somewhere sort of from quite similar to the levels we're at now, through to continuing or accelerating change, which might mean that if we fast forward 10 years from now, you could have 20, 30, or even 40% online. What's interesting, though, is even when we spoke to some of the CEOs of the absolute top online businesses, the pure play businesses, there are very few that are talking about seeing their sectors or areas exceeding 40%. So that means that there is clearly a role for retail stores, but perhaps the role of those stores is changing. And the reason for that is the simple path to purchase that classic marketers or retailers dealt with maybe 10, 20 years ago is no more. We're now involved in a really complex web. Think about your own shopping habits. You might look at something on your mobile, you then might go to a store, you might compare it to another store, you might complete a transaction in the store but on your phone. You might click and collect it, you might do home delivery. If there's a problem, you might return it to a store. You might look at reviews online, you might compare your product or check with friends on social media. It's a really complicated and intertwined landscape, and that's creating a whole bunch of challenges, both for the retailers and also, by extension, for landlords. Because trying to work out where in this chain we invest and where we attribute value becomes really tricky. One of the things that I was interested in, I worked with Verdict, who are now Global Data, to try and really get under the skin as to what the value and contribution of stores might be in this new world. And so we did a piece of work a couple of years ago now where we spoke with 30,000 consumers and we asked them, not in generic terms about how they shop or what they do, but quite specifically about the last online purchase that they made, what the item was, what they bought, how they came to own it. And we then traced back to see the path that they'd followed to get to that purchase. So when we think about these incremental parts of the market, you start off here with the kind of traditional till sales, physical sales going through a store. You then layer in click and collect, a small but fast-growing segment. Then you have an area that hadn't been looked at very much till this work, which was online sales browsed in store. So again, think of either a large, expensive purchase like a sofa or a TV or something. You might see it first, but make the final decision later from home. Or an item of clothing that you might buy in a different size or a different color, where you have first tried it on or seen it in store. You then have online sales that are kind of home delivery, but from retailers that also own a store portfolio. Then we have pure play sales, so the likes of Amazon. And finally, the small and dwindling mail order and TV shopping. If we take those online sales that comprise of the click and collect, the ones that are browsed first in store, delivered straight home, and the pure plays, interestingly, about 2/3 of all of those sales are done by retailers who also have stores in their portfolio. We call them store operators. And within that group, about 40% of the transactions are directly touching or utilising a store in the journey. So to put that into numbers, what we can see is 83% of sales in the UK are going through physical channels, traditionally with the tills. When you take in these other blocks on top of it, that grows actually to 87% directly touching a store in some form. And even when you slice the data, when you take out, for example, groceries, the numbers are not so different. So when you take groceries out, you've got 77% going through the tills today, rising to 84% when you start factoring in click and collect and the ones browsed first in store. Even when you start splitting it other ways, by gender or by age, socioeconomic and so on, we take the youngest age group, 16 to 24-year-olds, you maybe wouldn't have intuitively thought or realised, even amongst that group, you've got over 70% are buying through the tills physically, and that rises to just shy of 80% when you start taking these other factors into account. What it means is the tills are an increasingly poor representation of the value that the store is bringing in the journey. So if you think about different sectors, the degree of boost, the extra pounds that each pound of store sales represents, varies a lot. So to take electricals, you might be recording £100 through the till, but it's actually driving £128 in this example. Why? Because the likes of Carphone Dixon's, John Lewis, have got a very effective omni-channel offer that works very seamlessly between the online and the offline. Conversely, at the other end, you've got areas like health and beauty with quite limited online penetration, and some of that is down to also the type of goods and buying behaviours. It's more impulse buying or needs-based buying, and therefore it lends itself a bit less well to online. The next thing we did was try and look at some of the direct interplays between online and offline in our own portfolio when stores were opened. So this data measures the online hits or the online activity in a geographic area directly around a new store opening. And what we find is when a brand opens a store in one of our centres, the online activity goes up by more than 50%, and it stays at this new higher level. And so you've got the store driving the brand recognition, the trust, the route to returns, which is feeding superior online sales, and that then creates the positive flywheel that those online sales might feed things like click and collect sales. One of the other things that's interesting is even when we get down to the pure play end of things, some of the very established pure plays actually are also utilising physical networks in different ways. So taking someone like ASOS, almost half of their sales are actually third-party brands, and those brands are typically high street names that have some form of presence and marketing and association that comes from their portfolios. Whether that's the smaller niche brands like Ted Baker, who continue to do really well, larger, more established mainstream players like the River Islands of the world, or interesting new uses of retail, for example, their tie-up with Boots, whereby they deliver product via the Boots network. So the question this brings us all to is, what might the future hold? And everyone knows about and talks about Amazon, but in some ways I think Alibaba is the more interesting business, the way that they're dominating not only retail, but payments, search, social media, and so on in China. And Jack Ma says, e-commerce is rapidly becoming a traditional business. Pure e-commerce players will face tremendous challenges. The company is anticipating a transformed retail industry in the future, one driven by the integration of online and offline shopping, logistics, and data. And I thought perhaps the best way to bring this across is actually a short clip from Jack Ma, and you can see what's going on right now today in China at the cutting edge of retail.
It's not every day that you see Jack Ma at the grocery store. That's because this isn't just any grocery store. This is He Ma Supermarket, and it's Alibaba's entry into what the company calls new retail. I'm at a He Ma Supermarket in Shanghai. This was the first of what are now 13 locations in China, and it's been open for 18 months. For Alibaba, this is the best example yet of the merger of online and offline shopping. He Ma uses technology and data to provide a seamless and more efficient shopping experience for consumers. For starters, everything at He Ma is powered by mobile. You download the app, and then you use your phone to shop. For example, He Ma is all about fresh foods from all over the world. But how would you know? Everything in the store has a barcode. You use the app to scan the code, and you get a ton of great information about the product. He Ma will even make recommendations of similar products based on what you have in your hands. These are exactly the Washington cherries that I was looking for. This is perfect. One of the biggest attractions in He Ma is its seafood section. That's because in China, there's a long tradition of hand-picking the freshest seafood for consumption. And at He Ma, that means you don't even have to wait until you get home to eat. You can have it cooked for you right here in the store, just like Jack Ma did.
This is our first time coming here after work. The place is quite big, clean, and bright. And we pick the food together, and then we eat it together. The food here, the seafood, the mushrooms, they are fresh and they're delicious, and we enjoy the time. Yeah.
Now, for all the convenience of shopping in person at a He Ma supermarket, some of the best innovations were delivered online. See, these stores also serve as fulfillment centers. Customers place orders through the app, and then workers run around the store collecting items for delivery. Each store serves a radius of about 3 kilometers, about 1.5 miles, and they can serve thousands of orders a day, each within 30 minutes. Here's how it works. Each employee has a scanner and a delivery bag with a unique barcode on it. That barcode corresponds with a specific order. After they finish packing their orders, they drop the bags off here. When I'm ready to check out, I use the He Ma app, which is linked to my Alipay account. He Ma is also a membership club. If I join, the app remembers all of my purchases so it can personalize and improve my shopping experience the next time around. I can't wait to see how they try to entice me back here. But honestly, I don't think it's going to be too hard.
Excuse the slight Americanisms at the end, but you get the point. If I was to try and sort of distill down some of what they're doing, there's probably 3 key roles that the stores have. The first is showrooming. This is an Apple store. Apple are probably the best example of this currently, but it's going to become increasingly important for many different retailers and retail categories. The second is the kind of traditional role of the store around transactions. But the nature of those transactions is going to get more complicated. As people order more in-store, they potentially use their mobiles, they might pay through facial recognition technologies and the like. And so tracking these different forms of payment is only going to get harder. And finally, fulfillment. At the moment, stores are sort of relatively basic in this regard. Most offer click and collect and not much more. But a number of the retailers are starting to experiment with using stores for last mile delivery as well. And that's a trend we think will continue as well. What all this means, though, is that it's going to get harder and more complicated to be a successful retailer. Of course, you need to start with a compelling customer proposition, bringing together great service, value, and the right product. In fact, if we look at the sort of recent round of sort of admins and CVAs, yes, many have been tipped over the edge by the likes of the exchange rate changes with Brexit, with looking at rates revaluation, minimum wages, consumer confidence and the like. But in almost every case, it's more about the fundamentals of product, value and service that haven't been right in those businesses for 5 or 10 years. Unfortunately, that's not going to be enough in the future. You also need to be underpinned by data, technology, and vertical integration, the latter being important because it's a means of differentiating product from peers, as well as the ability to constantly innovate, adapt, and change in a fast-moving world. Landlords, for their part, need to be just as agile and also hit many of these levers as well. Taking a couple of quick examples from what we do at British Land, it's much more than just having an asset and taking a coupon from it. We really think about how we link into, connect with communities and the shoppers on our sites. We design great spaces that meet the needs of both form and function, environments people really want to spend time in, as we say, places people prefer. We enhance those assets, really actively managing them, getting the right combination of segments, thinking hard about which occupiers we have, and servicing them very well. And increasingly, that's about extending into different areas. So if I take the example of Fort Kinnaird, in 2015, we added a 7-screen Odeon, then we added a lot of different restaurants, a Primark flagship came along, and then more recently, a Pure Gym. So we're sort of extending the different uses and audiences for that site. We also enliven the spaces too, through really good customer service for our shoppers, events and experiential elements. We think if you do that right, there's an opportunity. And I just took a look sort of long term at our own performance on sales and footfall. And we've tracked pretty consistently about 1.5% outperformance on sales and about 3 to 3.5% on footfall. But it needs constant innovation and investment to do that. You also see it in rental growth as well, and I think this is the reality check of the polarizing world that we're already in and is only going to accelerate. You have to be really clear and honest with yourself if your assets are top quartile or if they have potential to become top quartile, because it's very clear that you don't want to and can't afford to be in the secondary space. It's a vulnerable position to be. Taking all that together and sort of drawing some conclusions, first, omnichannel is going to be the key retail model going forward. We're seeing this combination of retail and leisure places, experiential elements that are going to take a share of consumers' time and money. The role of stores is evolving though. Showrooms, transaction points, and increasingly fulfillment centres. The landscape is shifting. To some degree, it was ever thus. There's always been fast turnover within retail, but it's clear that not everyone is going to be successful in adapting to a more omnichannel model. And we can see some of the new entrants that don't have the existing large portfolios, that don't have the underinvested stores, that have the data and technology hardwired into their DNA, have an advantage over some of the longer established ones. And what all that means is that we're going to see polarization continuing or even accelerating. The placemaking elements will just get more important over time, curating the retail and leisure mix. And innovation and capabilities, both for retailers and for the landlords, will get more and more important as we look to the future. With that, I'll wrap up and look forward to discussing some of these topics and more shortly in the panel. Thank you.